This is one of the challenges I notice with many of the CDOs. They come from a technical background. They have a hard time figuring out how to basically team up with the business.
You need to speak that language with that particular audience. What are their pain points? What are they looking for? What will get them to, one, trust you, and two, for them to start realizing value quickly?
Any parting advice to CDOs, people in the data?
Agnostic to industry, agnostic to function, agnostic to geography. Data is universal.
Hi, folks. This is Prat Moge with the AI Data Fabric Show. I'm super excited today to welcome with my cup of chai. I have a really accomplished guest here in Neil Bhandar, who's the Chief Data Officer at actually has been a CDO for many companies. Currently a CDO at Generac. But has had like a really very interesting and remarkable career doing this across different industries, different business functions. I haven't seen somebody with that kind of a versatility. So I'm really excited to welcome Neil to the show. Welcome, Neil.
Ben, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
Awesome. So Neil, I'm waiting to dig in, but one of the things, as I mentioned, is you've done companies like small and large. You've done like Procter and Gamble, strategy, planning, marketing. I mean, that's like serious. You've done your own startup, which you launched, which is also super impressive. Then you moved to financial services. You went to JPMorgan. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm missing something in between. I'm sure I am.
You're good.
You went to JPMorgan, and there you took on again the chief data officer, but there you also took on a function like HR, which is I find super interesting. And there's a bunch of interesting questions and insights I'd like to get there. And then obviously you've done the horizontal thing. You're now at Generac, again, very different space and sector. So my first question is when you and seems like math is a theme that goes through your thing. You teach statistics at a grad school level. On the side in your copious free time, what got you started and how did you get into data and analytics? Was there a specific point that you sort of said, look, I want to do this here?
Yeah. I was always a fan of math. Grew up in India, and the culture was you either became a doctor, engineer, or a lawyer. So I had similar inspiration from within the family, and was drawn into engineering. My dad was an engineer. So that was basically how I ended up becoming an engineer, and the math and the numbers always were exciting, interesting, to the extent that even with my young kids.
Yeah, and you picked up OR, right? Which is a very interesting science.
So, when I finished my mechanical engineering, my interest was in math, but I wanted to stay close to engineering, and so I decided, production planning, sequencing, scheduling, the heuristics behind it was something that fascinated me, and that's how I picked operations research. So the OR draw for me was looking at logistics network, looking at various ways in which we could do optimization, and where problems are more complex, what other alternatives existed. So what ends up happening over time is I start seeing a lot of similarities in problems. And I love to talk about this a little bit because I often give my kids this sort of an example. Early on, I was in supply chain planning, right? And my focus was inventory optimization, multi-echelon inventory optimization. And if you think about a classic inventory problem, right, you get a replenishment, so if you were to plot this on an XY axis, it's a very typical sawtooth, right? You get a replenishment, your inventory goes up, over time it depletes. And I started to notice that triangle repeats itself in multiple different areas. So I'll give you an example. When I was in financial services, one of my very first projects in the credit risk space was in the credit card business. And believe it or not, that same triangle shows up all over again, but now in a very different industry, in a whole different context. What happens is when you take a credit card balance, you start with the zero. Over
Mm.
time, you increase. At the end of the month, you pay
You
it
got a
down.
payment.
It's a sawtooth. Just the peak happens at the end versus at the beginning. So now
Interesting.
let's take that same triangle, right? Now the geometry of triangle becomes very interesting. What are you really trying to do? Triangles are very difficult shapes to focus on. So what you end up doing is if you were to take the area under that triangle, all you're doing is you're converting it into a rectangle by taking half base of and into height, which is nothing but a half of that triangle converted into a rectangle. And over time, if you're solving an inventory problem, you're trying to figure out what is going to be your carrying cost, what is going to be your cost of replenishing and placing an order. So you're trying to figure those same concepts out now in the financial services world to figure out what is your loss rate going to be for those people that are going to walk away with your money because their triangles don't look even.
Right.
They carry a
Right.
balance, right?
Right.
Or you have a cost of capital because you're lending money out and there's
That's
cash
right.
coming in. So at some point in time, that loss is going to have to catch up. So you're going to have to price that in. Long story short, what interests me about math and numbers is to be able to visualize these into geometric problems and then sort of manipulate them in my head. I love doing this. Oftentimes, I wake up with some of these visualizations in my own head early in the morning.
Awesome. That's a deep research agent now in the AI world. That's great. When you started, like one of the things I found fascinating was Gamble is known for its depth and rigor when it comes to strategy, planning, marketing, analytics. And you were part of the group that launched Tide Coldwater, right? Which is like a new. Can you share like some of the what was the concept? You know, what was the result? What was the impact? Why did it succeed?
Yeah,
Anything you can
yeah.
share?
It's funny. The typical perception of what a brand marketer in any organization, not just Procter, is that they're more touchy feely, they're more emotional, they're more communication oriented. The reality is actually a brand marketer is a strategist,
Yeah.
right? They're all about data. They're all about trying to figure out how to make sense of it in the real world. So, as analytical as they are, they're also trying to figure out how to make money out of that data, how to basically generate value. Back in 2004, we were sitting on an innovation that had been sitting around for quite a long time. And this was where, the idea is when you put warm water in your detergent, the detergent acts more effectively towards cleaning and your clothes look cleaner and all those things. So at Procter, the innovation was they had an enzyme induced detergent, which is the base tide, that didn't need activation from hot water or warm water, right? So the catalyst that warm water was didn't need to happen. It activated on its own the moment you put water into it. We were in a cycle back then. This was basically, the second Bush administration was in place, and cost of a barrel of oil went from $45 a barrel to
Right.
about $105 a barrel, and people were feeling the pinch. Inflation was high, so we realized this was an opportunity to take this innovation where you could use cold water in your detergent and save the consumer some money. So we had done some research. I think back then it was something in the order of about $63 per year. Not a huge number, but savings
But as a
nonetheless.
fractional amount,
Correct.
it's
Correct.
significant. Yeah.
And the other thing was when you use cold water, and you'll notice this with some of your finer fabrics in your sweaters, they highly recommend you use cold water so the clothing doesn't shrink.
Right.
Right. And the last piece is when you use warm water, there is a greater tendency that colors will bleed. So we had a very clear set of value propositions that we could present. We took all that information from our communication perspective and said, look, these are the kinds of things we want to emphasize and highlight. Now, I will tell you there is a downside to this too, by the way. And so the equipment makers, the Maytags, the Whirlpools of the world, the Samsungs of the world hated it. Because there is, I'll tell you the unintended consequence in a second. But what ended up happening for us was we took the three-pronged value proposition for the consumer from a communication perspective. Tide as a product is a loss leader. So what that means from a CPG perspective is if you have a captaincy in a particular category, retailers will sell the product below a certain price where they lose money on it.
Yeah.
The intent is because that product is on promotion, it brings crowds into the store. Ticket size and basket size is high. So
Right.
because their money making is on volume, they're willing to forego the profit on that product in order to get the rest of the purchases that happen.
Right.
Now, we were aware of that fact, and we were also aware of the fact that if we continue doing that, there'll come a point in time where the next product that comes in that's better than Tide will replace Tide. So we wanted to constantly seek out opportunities by which we could build some margin for the retailer and pass that margin on. So back then, one of the strategies that we pursued was down counting. And down counting means if you take a base Tide, it's a concentrated product. You're not required to fill the cap to its brink. You actually need to go just to the lowest graduation and you're still fine. But people still tend to overdose, right? What we did was we down counted it in terms of concentration, kept the pricing the same. And as a result, the margin that we built on it, we passed it to the retailer.
Wow.
And so it
Wow.
became a profitable product for the retailers. That was the second prong on which we fired. The third prong on which we fired was we basically said, let's focus on those retailers. Because when we launched Tide Coldwater, it was a very small budget, typical budgets at Procter and the 100 plus $1 million range. And the smaller budget basically meant we had to be very, very conscious about where we focused from a shopper
Surgical.
activation perspective. And
Yeah.
shopper activation, so at Procter, there was this philosophy back then, first moment of truth and second moment of truth. First moment of truth is when you're standing at the shelf, you're looking at that expanse of all the different products that are available and you're trying to make a decision. Oftentimes, that decision is made by your brain, right? It's not quite an impulse decision, but it's typically what in
System one.
Daniel Kahneman's world, where
Yeah.
your system one, system two are playing with each other, and so you're making a decision not with your heart but with your head, right? It's a cerebral process. So we basically wanted to make sure that when that happens, at that point of retail, we wanted to give them a compelling proposition. So we decided on focusing only on those retailers and those channels where we had high close rate in the category. We had golden households that tended to shop in that category more often. And a golden household for that business was people who were going to do more than one load or maybe even multiple loads a day, right? Especially
Wow.
people with young kids, right?
Interesting.
And then those retailers where we had a resonation with our prime prospect for the brand. So that gave us that three-pronged firing approach. And as a result of it, in a matter of less than 4 weeks, we were able to gain 4% market share. That's
That is
very
amazing.
significant in a $7 billion for a $7 billion
Amazing.
brand.
That is awesome. I mean, that's just like the power of analytics. But again, thinking back, like, ICP, basically, you had a very clear intent ICP driven by. And I can goes to show that if you combine analytics and if you combine an understanding of the business, so it sounds like you were super comfortable as somebody who's trained as an engineer, techie, right? Statistics, data science. You were very comfortable actually going and hanging out with the business people. This is one of the challenges I notice with many of the CDOs,
Yeah. So
where if they come from a technical background, they have a hard time figuring out um, how to basically team up with the business. Anything you can share there that helps essentially all the CDOs and CDO aspirants out there.
yeah, no, and that is the typical way that I describe myself is I am a business guy that sits in the data world, not the other way around, right? Believe it or not, this is my very first role at Generac throughout my entire career, 20 plus years,
Interesting.
where I am
In
positioned
IT.
myself in IT. I've
Interesting.
never ever been in IT. So
Interesting.
this is generally how I describe it, right? Data is data is data is data. It's like your English, no matter where you come from, is still the same English. But the accent that an Australian will have will be different from a British guy, from an American, and even within the United States, if you're in the northern part of the US versus the southern part of the US. Data is the same way. The accent changes based on where you are, whether you're a data guy in the business and that business is HR, that business is credit risk, that business is supply chain, that business is marketing, but you're still dealing with that same data. And so I think for all aspirants in the data world, I think you need to figure out how to be able to modulate that accent.
Yeah.
So
The
when you're having
fluent.
a conversation with a supply chain guy, you need to speak supply chain. You don't need to speak
Yes.
AWS, Azure, a
Yeah.
mixed integer linear program, or a heuristic, or a genetic algorithm. You need to speak that language with that particular audience, and you need to be able to not to make it sound like a chameleon, but really be able to adapt into that business. What are their pain points? What are they looking for? What will get them to, one, trust you, and two, for them to start realizing value quickly.
So let me ask you. I mean, this is a great point. So how do you moved from um, you moved from marketing? Let's say I'm using marketing as a loose term, but you moved from marketing into, let's say, risk or and then HR at JP, right?
Yeah,
For
yeah,
example. So when you went to HR, I
yeah.
mean, that's a very interesting. Like, how do you deconstruct or how do you understand what are the important problems that they're trying to solve, and then ultimately you have to be sort of bring this back to like you said,
Yeah.
this is about triangles, this is about optimizing
Yes.
these things, right? Like, what was your observation when you landed in HR, and the way they were doing it? What was important, and how did analytics ultimately? How does analytics impact HR?
Yeah. This is typically independent of HR or any other function, how I approach it, right? Before I go into any function, I create my own preconceived biases and notions of what I think are important to them. The first few weeks when I sit in those meetings with the audience, I'm trying to validate some of those assumptions. And if they validate, great. If they don't, there's a new learning for me, right?
Yeah.
So if you when I first started, and by the way, when I first went to HR, I thought all they did was hire, fire, and pay. That was my understanding. I had very limited understanding of what HR did. Believe it or not, when I first went to financial services, I had a very limited understanding of what financial services was all about. Long story short of it was, as you get to a certain milestone within the matter of first 2, 3, 4 weeks, and you're sitting with the executive leadership, it became obvious HR was most interested in the as a cost center on what are they paying for, what is incurring cost for them, right? Whether it was attrition, whether it was the cost of hiring people, whether it was engagement that wasn't necessarily translating into active value. So is there a learning development opportunity? Um, we started looking at there are people in this business, but they're not talking to this business. So we started looking at the network graphs of who's talking to whom, led some organizational network analysis. And then what will give them the incentive to talk to one another? Can you embed champions from one part of the business to the other? So as you start to pick up on some of these signals, then you start to think, okay, what is the mathematical way I can handle this? What will give
Interesting.
them the solution that they're looking for? They don't need to know it's O&A or it's like
Correct.
an organizational network analysis. They just need to know I need to get this part of the business to talk to this part of the business.
Right.
I don't know what is going on and why they're not doing
That's
this.
right.
Right?
Your job is to model that
Correct.
process, or
Correct.
um,
The other thing is HR, believe it or not, is an extremely data oriented function. The fundamental challenge for them is they don't trust data. So they're all about, yes, give me the insight, give me the analytics. But at the end of the day, I want line by line information that I want to keep in my back pocket. So if somebody asks me, how did you arrive at it? I can rattle off names.
interesting.
So largely, they are still in a world where they've been burnt maybe a few times, and as a result of it, there's a trust gap that exists. So the good part was, given they were data oriented and they were already using stuff, it became easy to sort of address those trust issues in order for them to sort of start embracing the more advanced analytics. We started getting into this. There was this whole exercise that my team had with called employee opinion surveys once a year. Right. And every quarter we did what are called pulse surveys, which were shorter versions of the employee opinion survey. Then the question came up, there's all these anecdotes that people have. Happy employees make happy customers. Right. So we then started to get into the idea of validating. Is that true? Right. Because these things would sort of, these were like mini bombs that would get dropped every so often, talking about, you're listening to what these conversations are
It's
and you're validating.
common wisdom,
Correct,
kind of.
correct. And what we found was that there was no data that actually validated that. There may be, look, one thing I strongly believe is if you torture data enough, you can get it to say whatever you want it to say. So you take a scatter plot that is all over the place, and you can take a segment and say, look here, high engagement, high satisfaction. Works. But then you're ignoring the rest of the data set that exists,
Good.
right? So there were
Very
some of
interesting.
those sorts of exercises that we went through where we said, look at your data, not just from the perspective of new discoveries, but validation of existing biases, right? If this bias exists, is it really true across the universe, or is there a pocket where it's true? And so that became an exercise where we started going after small pieces here, small pieces there, and chipping away at it in a way where we started building more trust with what capability that we were bringing to the table.
Very interesting.
The same happened with questions like where people said, I'm looking for a job and I don't see myself with the company in 12 months' time. This is a typical question. How often do you look for a job outside? Do you see yourself with the company? And so we started analyzing that sort of information to see, is that true? And largely, people were very, very honest in answering that question. So then we started saying, okay, so what happens to those people that answered yes, but still stayed with the company? And then we quickly found out that when you look at their longitudinal history with the company, they changed managers, or they changed their teams, or they changed their function. So
Interesting.
those sorts of questions were the ones that were part of conversations that were happening. So there was that undercurrent of conversations which were drawing out for us the necessary threads to pull on.
That's very interesting. And you can do something about that, right? Like if somebody says that, then it basically says maybe the environment's got to change to keep them. You got to write a book like Freakonomics or something,
So
Neil.
it's funny you say this, Pat, because I've been working on a book for a little while now called The Cost of Curiosity.
Huh.
And the whole concept there is, I believe the world of analytics needs to evolve into the equivalent of an Alexa device, right?
Hey,
There is a very small fixed cost, which is, in my case, I bought the device for like whatever, $29.99. And then on a ongoing basis, the variable cost is just internet and power. That's it, nothing more. So we need to get to that stage with analytics and data. Today, the marginal cost of answering a question
it's huge.
is huge. Like I ask a question today, and then there's a follow-up question. It either costs the same or more.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes it takes so much time that the question has often lost relevance.
That's right. That's right. I think 100%. There's no reuse. There is no, like you said, basically the cost of, yeah. And we're not even talking about the real cost of AI.
Exactly right.
Like,
So there is definitely an opportunity to reduce that cost of curiosity. And so that's what my book is about.
okay, awesome. Add me to your early
Indeed.
readers.
Happy to.
Happy to help in any way. Now, with AI, Neil, like you started statistics, machine learning, you kind of gone through all the classic algorithms, optimization, right? Linear, nonlinear, all that, graph theory. Now, tell me, like when you look at AI and you look at both the challenges and the opportunities, what comes to mind? Like, give me some tough observations.
Yeah, I think this is both interesting, scary, and fascinating all at the same time. One of the biggest challenges, the way I see facing up to most of us, is we do not have a common baseline understanding of what is AI.
Yeah.
And when people talk about the risk of AI, they're often fixated on the kinds of things they hear in media, like for example, hallucination. I mean, those things are not really a problem that I have to face up to because we've got architectures by which we can control it. What I am most afraid about is the sea of sameness. You use OpenAI GPT 5.0, I'm using GPT 5.0. It's the same exact pre-trained model,
Yeah,
right? The
that's right.
only difference is you now have some sort of a vector database, some ontology that is controlling for hallucination after. But the model that is helping arrive at a decision is the same.
Right.
There isn't the depth of understanding of some of those concepts in the business. On a separate front, one of the challenges that we have is we are definitely in a hype cycle, right? And trust me, I'm a big believer in AI, and I still think there is a ton of value that it can create. But the hype cycle has a lot of blinders on people when it comes to decision making on what needs to happen. And so you've got about three-quarters or more of CEOs that graduated before the internet came to be. You've got 90% of CIOs who have been in the role before generative AI came to be.
Right.
So you have a huge literacy gap that exists,
Right.
right? And at the result of it, then somebody says we need more AI. These are the kinds of blind spots that they are not quite able to navigate easily.
That's right.
I mean, that is
Yeah.
a huge, huge risk to me, right?
Yeah.
Analytic literacy is one thing that if we don't bridge quick enough, and when I say analytic literacy, I don't mean they need to understand what a layer of perceptron means, what back propagation means, what are epochs of training, what is the bias, what is and bias not in the sense of the adjective bias, the
Yeah.
bias,
The
from
on the
a
weights and models.
back
Yeah.
propagation perspective. I mean, those kinds of things, it's not the technology, but it's how it's being used and that sea of sameness piece that I'm talking about, because that is scary,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 100%. I think partly it's like back to your point of explainability of why is something.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I give you a black box and I give you inputs and there are outputs. And
Yeah.
if you're not able to explain
Yeah, very much so.
how they're tied, even if that model is, um, something that, and I think your point is like, firstly, there's this averageness
Yes.
because, and then the question is, how do you stand away from that?
Indeed.
And what's unique to you? How do you bring that?
I have one additional example I want to share with you, Pratt, because this one is quite interesting. In the banking world, obviously there is this constant endeavor to make sure that your next model performs better than your previous model. And so there is this constant champion challenger teams that are working towards beating models when it comes to portfolio performance or creating synthetic portfolios and so on and so forth. And oftentimes, what people will end up doing is they will do second order, third order models. So input from one model goes into a second model. That model goes into a third model. Huge risk of overfitting, right? In a more machine learning sense.
Correct.
We have a model today where we are using a pre-trained model to generate a machine learning model that is then being deployed. Agentic.
Yeah. You're just going to do that at scale.
Yeah. And can you imagine now the piece that people do not understand? This is where the literacy piece comes in. Resonance.
Right. That's
A
right.
completely unintended consequence. So I want to go back to that unintended consequence of the Coldwater piece. Bacterial growth inside your dish, your washer.
Oh, which hot water would have taken care of.
Correct.
Very cool. But was that known or was that also unintended?
Not to us.
Not to you, but like in the previous generation.
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
But when the
Interesting.
the folks on the Maytag, on the Whirlpool, on the Samsung side started complaining, it became obvious that this is the risk.
So now you can sell them another product, which is it.
Well, obviously. but the point basically is, I mean,
Yes.
some of these unintended consequences of these sorts of things, and now think about this: when you're deploying these models to make very large autonomous or semi-autonomous decisions,
Absolutely.
you do not know what that resonance is going to look like when multiple models that are independently running without the knowledge of the other existing, coming from the same pre-trained model, is going to result in resonance that could be devastating.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. You're running very fast in the wrong direction.
Exactly. You don't know.
And you don't know.
That's the scary part.
What is exciting to you?
Oh, the technology is fantastic. I mean, for the longest time, there was this huge scare that there isn't adequate enough talent. There isn't adequate enough talent. Now we're facing up to the exact opposite. We've gone to 15,000, 20,000 layoffs of knowledge workers, white collar employees, because you're now suddenly realizing that they can be replaced with an agent. Right?
Yes.
It's not the fact that we've addressed that lack of resources, lack of talent gap, but the possibility of what this technology can do is absolutely exciting. I mean,
awesome.
I often say this to folks. I feel like we are at that stage where we are truly, truly limited by imagination and physics.
Yeah.
Right. I
And
felt like that. You couldn't have said that with
yes,
enough confidence up until now.
that's right. Any parting advice to CDOs, people in the data analytics space, particularly the ones that are straddling data, IT, business?
Yeah. The few things that come to mind first is, if anyone can take anything away from my personal career, I'll say agnostic to industry, agnostic to function, agnostic to geography. Data is universal, right? You are certainly limited by your curiosity, your interest in learning those things, right? You just because you're in data doesn't necessarily mean you fit everything and anything. Your fit depends on your curiosity.
Absolutely. That was awesome. I really appreciate your time. And I'm looking forward to reading your book when it comes out, Neil.
For sure. You'll be
Thanks
the first
again.
on the list.
Thanks again.
Brad,
Talk
thanks
soon.
so much. Have a
Bye.
great weekend.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.